Thank you very much to all the speakers. Now it's time to listen to the first panel, The Spirit of Helsinki, Then and Now, a discussion between Markus Meckel and Meckel Žantovský, held by Laura Kolbe. After the panel, we invite you to a cocktail reception at 7 p.m.
Welcome to Finland, Helsinki and Finlandia Hall. And of course, to talk a little bit, I'm an urban historian by background, talk a little bit about this place and what does it mean for us here in Helsinki and how this, let's say, as a kind of municipal, very local political building or construction suddenly became European and even globally significant building. You can see here the dream of big Helsinki 100 years ago, 1918, and the venue of Finlandia Hall is just in the middle of the map, dreaming about the future Helsinki to come. It never did, but you can see the location here at the railway station being one of the centrals in planning and dreaming of whatever was to become the capital city of independent Finland. Yes, it took a couple of decades before this dream was even remotely planned, and the task was given to architect academician Alvar Aalto, being probably the most famous Finn during the post-war decades, and he got the job to plan the new urban republican core to the city of Helsinki. The old one being, if you have not yet seen, please visit it, the Imperial Senate Square, just very close to the harbor. And now the big city dream included elements of culture, of course, central national institutions, and all of them being located on the opposite side of the Parliament House, made this area a very political and very national and very urban at the same time. You can see Alvar Aalto with the mayor Lauri Aho dreaming about the metropolitan and big city dreams. And in this plan was included several institutional and cultural buildings following the shores of Töölönlahti Bay, and also a lovely American influence with car is the king politics, namely the great traffic arrangement. As you already have maybe noticed, Helsinki is located on a peninsula, and this creates some challenges. No Ringstrasse can be planned around the city, but you have to open up the traffic line from the south to the north. And that's exactly what Aalto did with the Street of Freedom, was a huge American kind of traffic planning, which actually then caused the whole plan to collapse in the early 1970s. So here you can see the cultural buildings, and there you can see the traffic arrangements following up the lines of Northern Railway. Magnificent. Of course, one dreams now and then what would have happened if the Aalto plan would have been realized. Would it be now a kind of urban planning monumental area? Anyhow, very soon this became the monument for architect Alvar Aalto, and his genius kind of mind, so to say, glorified the whole building, and Aalto's rethinking and his considerations about the modern architecture are still cited in many ways, although his traffic planning, as mentioned, became rather old-fashioned very soon. By the way, last week there was opened an Alvar Aalto and his two wives exhibition in the Finlandia Hall. Take a look, it's a very nice creation showing what the good mind of genius architect influenced. Of course, Finlandia Hall opened in 1971, got many urban tasks. It became immediately the icon of transformation for the area, where you can see where the Parliament House, the National Museum, and the main road named after Marshal Mannerheim, the Mannerheim Street, and the railway station, main post office, etc. But as you can also see, the Finlandia Hall was the only building realized from the Aalto plan. And the name Finlandia indicated the national dreams of creating this a kind of special building for both national and transnational dimensions. Originally, if you go back to the City Hall, the dream was to create, the right-wing parties wanted to have a conference house, and the left-wing parties wanted to have a Congress house. So these mixed activities were linked in Finlandia. But as mentioned, already during the time of its birth and today, it's still the creation and the pearl of Finnish architecture. Of course, as you can see, the modernist architecture, interpreting already by the choice of material, the Italian marble, the link between the north and south, as was discussed here. Did in between the east and west exist north and south? Yes, that's what Aalto did. He interpreted this cultural connection through modern architecture. No, it's another story what happened with the Italian marble in this climate. That's one of the jokes, which is every 10-year present in Finlandia Hall when the marble is, well, flexible, let's put it in this nice way, in the Finnish climate. But anyhow, the idea was to create, first of all, the House of Culture, the home for the 2 symphony orchestras in Helsinki, and of course many, many other cultural events as well. And then the other wish was to use this building for congresses. It was a kind of capital city wish in Helsinki 1960s, that you have to be a European capital city by having a conference center. And that's exactly what the fathers of Helsinki wanted to plan. And that's, yes, what they also got. And the start, as we already know, and it has been repeated a couple of times, was the security meeting in 1975, where the notion of Spirit of Helsinki was created, or it was created a little bit later, but where it densified itself due to the simple fact that for the first time in a long time, the European and global leaders were present in the same space. Here a couple of pictures you can imagine, long speeches, a lot of sitting, a lot of talking, drinking and eating, but of course, finally, what was received changed the world history, definitely changed the European politics, and influenced deeply also Finland and Helsinki. So please use your day here and next day tomorrow to learn and walk around the Finlandia Hall, and of course also the surrounding, the area, which still after 100 years is unplanned. Now the city of Helsinki has put some flowers so that it looks nice, but still the Alvar Aalto dream of creating the chain of cultural republican buildings is under development, to put it nicely. But take a walk. The Audi Library is lovely, the music hall is nice, and the opera is also existing here along the Töölö Bay shores, but not as Aalto planned them. So, welcome to listen to our panel. I just put some here, but we are now probably hearing first the small speeches and presentations by our panel speakers. I just put here some of the notions, change and continuity themes, what can we expect, what do we need? The notion of hope was mentioned here, I think it's very important. And also, who is doing the future? What is the role of classical diplomacy, civic society? Do we need great men and women on the political stage again, or is their time over? What is the role of corporations, business today and in the future? And of course, looking in the long run on international congresses and summits, we can start it from the Westfalen 1648 stretch through Vienna, Berlin, Hague, and then, of course, Yalta, Paris, Helsinki, and what comes next? Where is the chain leading us to? So, thank you very much. Now we maybe can have the slide indicating whom you are listening now, and I think we have maybe approximately 45 minutes as in the program. We are a little bit behind. Yeah, I think we need, yes. Let's take it. We don't ask. We take the time we need for our discussion. We have two panelists and me being the moderator. You could see my name already, Laura Kolbe. I work as a professor of European history at the University of Helsinki and have been participating in organizing this happening today. First of all, Markus Meckel is a German politician and a well-known intellectual and also experiencing many political changes both in his own home country, GDR, working within the ecumenical education, and also being one of the founding fathers of Social Democratic Party in the GDR and becoming its deputy chairman. And many, many activities, including both local German and European dimension. Please, Markus Meckel.
Thank you very much. It is really the question what to say about the spirit of Helsinki. What we have seen, the cultural dimension, the building even, that belongs to it. But I would like to start much earlier. Because if we see the Lisbon Treaty, which is the basis of our, you could say, the constitution in the end of our European Union, and then there is said that it is the basis of the Hellenistic philosophy, the Roman law, the Jewish and Christian heritage, and Enlightenment. I would like just to mention it, but I think this is important because from that we can speak about our values. The division of power, the independency of justice, the free speech, the public independent media, and many other things. All that was determined very early in our history, in Germany, in Europe, and that shaped what we call the West. And it was determined after the disaster of the first half of the 20th century. And it is no by case that the UN Charter was established after the Second World War and all these disasters. That the Declaration of Human Rights was determined. But then we experienced in Europe the Cold War between East and West, with all that disasters which happened in the eastern part of Europe, and it couldn't be prevented. But it seemed to me that in the beginning of the 70s, there was more and more the acknowledgement that where for both sides it won't be possible a rollback. There was the acknowledgement you have, with all differences, to live together. And the question was how to live together and how to meet the global challenges. And then the remembrance and bringing back to the UN Charter and the human rights. That was the main challenge, which started, in my view, with the Spirit of Helsinki. Not just repeat these documents, but to start with a process of negotiations and bringing together the different dimensions of political life, giving diplomacy a chance, and giving a chance that Soviet Union, and they took the initiative, that Soviet Union will lose the territories which they won in the Second World War. To secure that territory, the results of Second World War, that was the interest of the Soviet Union. And at first, that's why the West refused. And only then it came to awareness that it could be used as a chance bringing together the different dimensions of security, of economy, and even the values and the questions of the human dimensions, the so-called third dimensions. And so I think this was the spirit to make strong by dialogue, by commitment to that, in that 10 principles, which was not in all points congruent to each other, not interfere in internal issues. And the question of human rights, that was in tension to each other. But it was and started a process, and that was in the end very important. And so that was the process that the East, the communist part of Europe, was always asked by the West how to fulfill that 10 principles, because there was following conference and again, and there was a population, and especially at first the dissidents in the society who stick to that and demanded and that commitment of that principles towards their own government. And that was not only in Poland with Solidarność, there was the strongest movement, but it was with Charta 77, it was in our case in GDR, and especially even in Russia. In Soviet Union, we will listen to that. And I think this was crucial to do that. I can't tell the whole story. But the top story of the CSCE process was after Gorbachev, and with Gorbachev, the Charter of Paris, after the German unification. The story after that was, in my view, step by step, a step back. Because the questions of security, the questions of rule of law, all that was not so much linked with OSCE. We can talk about later. And I think that we have to come to the current situation. And this current situation is challenged, especially by the question to us, how we can make strong our commitment to these values, which were the important issue of 1975. And I think that needs other instruments. We see, and we can name it especially with Mr. Putin. What he did, his imperial behavior, and not only behavior, this imperial war we experience now for 3 in the full-scale way, but more than 10 years we experience it. And this is our challenge to meet. We have to meet. But from the beginning of this year, we have the other challenge, that what we stick for, even 3 years ago. I wrote an article that in 22 that I said, now, because European Union started to be strong in 2022 to react to that. And even together with Mr. Biden, the North Atlantic commitment became strong. And now exactly this is lost with Mr. Trump. And we see that very often they talk and they call it diplomacy or deal, but in my view, it isn't. And so the challenge for us is how to stick to these values. And I think that exactly that is an issue we have to talk about. We have to take that challenge. We have to take initiative to make Europe strong. And if not NATO at all is possible to meet, we have to shape a European pillar. And even to be active, independent of United States, if they don't follow. We hope that they will. But we shouldn't take it as a condition. And that's why we need unity in Europe. We need initiative and leadership. We have in Germany a chancellor who is saying here that he takes leadership. And I would say what he's saying, it's good. What he's doing is not enough, in my view. And so the question is, what should be done? Really bring Europe together. If I see the German news every day, the first news is the last call of Mr. Trump. And I think this shouldn't be the behavior we should do. We should take initiative together. We should make us strong. We should give a real red line and not say that there is a red line and nothing doing after that is crossing. And that's why let's talk about these days about this history and about the difference in approach to that. Because we have to stick with to our values. Europe is never alone. 1975, there was the West, including North America. And that was important. Today, even if United States, hopefully not, but even if United States will go this time, hopefully only in this presidency, the other ways, we look to other partners. Not only in Europe with Great Britain and with Canada, we have to look to India and to other in the global world who are ready to cooperate in sticking to these values as a basis of our international world. We don't know the end, but we can't wait. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Markus Meckel. And the other panelist is Michael Žantovský, known as Senior Fellow for Prague Center for Transatlantic Relations. And Michael Žantovský is a well-known Czech diplomat, politician, writer, and translator, former spokesman, press secretary, and political director to President Václav Havel. He has also been ambassador to the United States, Israel, and the United Kingdom, with a lot of national and international experience. Please, Michael Žantovský.
Well, good evening. Thank you, my friends from the European Network, Rafał, and all the others for inviting me to this memorable event. Having had the Hungarian ambassador, I cannot resist the temptation to regale you with a story of the Iron Curtain, especially for the benefit of the younger among you. A father and a little son go out for a hike in the countryside in West Bohemia, and they walk for hours until they come to a barbed wire fence and the minefield behind it, and stop, and the little son asks the father and daddy, who lives behind the curtain? And the daddy smiles wanly and says, well, we are, my son. We are. So that's, you know, for you to have a taste of what it was like. Anyway, I will take a little more heretical perspective of the Helsinki Conference of 1975 and of the Final Act. I think it was both a diplomatic triumph and a political failure, and many other developments stemmed from that. There are, I think, very few events whose historical significance is more ambiguous and contradictory than that of the 1975 Helsinki Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe. First, it was an attempt to transcend and mitigate the tensions and dangers of the Cold War in the spirit of détente and enter a phase of relative security and limited cooperation between the two sides of the Cold War. In reality, it led to new sources of tension over the treatment of dissidents in communist countries, the declaration of martial law in Poland in 1981, the anti-nuclear protests in Western Europe, the Reagan Star Wars initiative, and finally, the denouement of the Cold War, in which, instead of coming to mutual understanding, one of the two sides utterly collapsed, proving that there are only two ways in which wars end, either by one side winning or by both sides becoming so exhausted that they can't go on. In this particular instance, only one side became exhausted. Second, it was a Westphalian-like attempt to cement and legitimize the post-Second World War realities, including the division of Germany, the Soviet sovereignty over the Baltic countries, which it had occupied as a consequence of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Treaty, the Finlandization of this country, and the unlimited Soviet suzerainty over the vassal countries of Central and Eastern Europe, which it applied to suppress the protests in Berlin in 1952, the Hungarian uprising in 1956, and the Prague Spring of 1968. Instead, it marked the beginning of a journey which ended up with German reunification, renewal of independence for Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and democratic revolutions in Central and Eastern Europe. Third, it was an attempt to reduce the risk of a military confrontation between the two sides of the Cold War through various confidence-building measures, limited disarmament deals, etc. Instead, it led to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the crisis over the NATO double-track decision in the 1980s, and the opening of a new, largely fictional but politically devastating Star War frontline of the Cold War. Fourth, it was an attempt at cohabitation of two economic systems, one organized and governed by the free market, the other organized and supervised by the national planning commissions, hopefully bringing economic benefits to both. Instead, even the modicum of open competition engendered by the Helsinki agreements led to the transition of the socialist plan system into an economic basket case. And finally, this attempt at a Cold War with a human face technically opened the way for exchange and cooperation in the fields of culture, science, and education, and paid what the Soviet side surely considered an affordably lip service to the principle of human rights and free expression. In doing so, it created an ever-expanding opening for protests and dissent in the communist countries, with the ascendance of the Helsinki watch groups The first one founded in Moscow in May 1976 in the apartment of Andrei Sakharov, we should remember, followed by Kiev, Lithuania, Czechoslovakia, Georgia, Armenia, and Poland. The foundation of the Charter 77 movement in Prague and the Solidarność trade union movement in Gdańsk. The genie was out of the bottle and could not be pushed back. The question is, was this just a fluke of history, or did it carry an air of inevitability? Inevitable it was not. Contrary to the communist belief in materialist determinism, it takes people and their decisions to make history. But neither was it a random series of events. It showed convincingly that by virtue of being total, a totalitarian system only thrives in isolation, seclusion, and the permanent atmosphere of fear. Whenever it succumbs to the temptation of coexistence and limited cooperation in exchange for concessions, however symbolic, it collapses and eventually dies of hyperoxia, the surplus of oxygen. The glory days of Helsinki ended with the 1990 Charter of Paris for a New Europe. The vision materialized, but only in part. Security, pluralist political systems, international cooperation, social market economies, human rights and civil society prevail today over a large part of formerly captive Europe. But there is still the other part, which after a short period of hope and promise in the early 1990s, increasingly resembles its old totalitarian self. Its largest country is currently engaged in a campaign of unbridled aggression and untold violence against a neighboring European country, violating every single commitment its predecessors agreed to in Helsinki in 1975, in Vienna and Paris in 1990, and in Budapest in 1994. It is morally, politically, and legally incumbent on the original signatories of the Helsinki Final Act, in the spirit of Helsinki, to make a stand in support of the beleaguered nations of Europe in the face of the clear and present threat of the new totalitarianism. Over the last few years, most, if not all, of the Helsinki signatory countries honored their commitments and helped Ukraine in a number of ways to hold its ground against the onslaught. Finland and Sweden, by joining NATO, bolstered European security. European NATO member countries, by increasing defense spending, are showing some strength again. But are we doing enough? Are we determined to do more and to do it for as long as it takes? And the most painful questions, are the Russians doing enough? Václav Havel said and wrote many times that it is unrealistic to expect help from the outside unless and until you are willing to help yourself. The Helsinki commitments are Russian commitments as well. So where is the Helsinki Committee? Where is Andrei Sakharov of 2025? Because unless and until voices are raised in Russia to protest this horrific assault against humanity, peace, and international order, nothing is going to change for the better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your opening speeches. I think they both indicated very clearly how we need in the past the memory places, the lieux de mémoires, a kind of historical happenings, which then it takes a couple of years or some moments before they become narratives, before they start to create narratives, both at the local, national, and in this case, European and global level. And this is exactly what 1975 Helsinki Conference did. My first question is a little bit personal. thinking of August 1975 when the conference took place and how much attention it did get exactly in the same year. I was visiting London with my journalist mother in August 75 and noticed that the Times wrote 5 centimeters about the Helsinki conference, not more. Nobody couldn't care less in England. But of course, it was indicating that later on the writings became more deep and analysis essential when you could follow up what happened in the conference. So my question is, where were you in August 1975? Did you recognize at all? Was there any writings about Helsinki conference in your respective newspapers?
I can tell you exactly where I was in 1975. I was in a mental institution. My original training is in psychology. I was a psychologist in a mental institution, but still it taught me a lot about politics and diplomacy. Yes, I mean, in the communist part of the Cold War, the conference was followed with much attention and a lot of enthusiasm, because the communists, the system, the Soviets, they craved recognition, they craved legitimacy. And the conference was a moment when they were recognized as co-equals, when their territorial claims and ambitions were respected and recognized, and when they, at least for a little time, became what the Germans call salonfähig. And so they celebrated. They thought that they tricked the West into making concessions, and there was a very little material price to be paid for that, and they were wrong. They miscalculated because they didn't count on the opening of the sad basket of the Helsinki Final Act that it gave to the dissidents and democratic opposition to the communist regime.
Yeah.
I don't remember that month and that date, but that time and later on, I was very much in favor of that CSCE process, and it had really effects for us. It had effects if you see the question of information. That in the media field, there were correspondents in the eastern countries who could report directly from these countries. In Germany, I would say, even I lived in that time in Berlin, and so it was possible to get news via TV and radio without correspondents in East Germany. But especially in the rural area, in the whole territory, it was really important. But I wouldn't think that we have some differences in that for that time. But I think that if we look today, in that looking back, the people who speak about the CSCE process just have in mind CSCE process, forgetting that at the same time that was the basis of security was NATO. And this was not the CSCE process. And CSCE process could change and could forward because there was the basis of security by NATO. And if we see that in that time, I don't know exactly, we have historians here, you can say it exactly, I think it was more than 4%. The state budget was given for security and military defense. And in Germany especially today, many people say that was the starting of bringing peace and security just by talks and dialogue and diplomacy. And I think this is wrong. And especially if we bring it to the presence. We have a strong discussion in Germany, and that's why I think we have to make it so strong. That the misunderstanding is that at first dialogue is needed and diplomacy is the most important, which should start now towards Putin. And I would say that's a totally misunderstanding. At first, Putin needs to be a clear partner, a strong Ukraine, and that's why our first duty is the solidarity with Ukraine. And I am dissatisfied what we are doing. In Germany, there was really a strong change with the so-called Zeitenwende, and that there was a change. But it was not enough. If I look what we are waiting for the next step of giving much more military support, even the question which was really important, that European Union was ready to open itself. How long it was clear that said you are not really have a European opportunity, European perspective as Ukraine. This is changed, and that's important. But if we see in which way it is really followed, what we are really doing, I think it is not enough. And that's my point, that I would say now not diplomacy towards Putin is asked. We have to take really a strong defense. We have to support much more Ukraine. They are Ukrainians, are saving us today. And this we have to be aware. And we have time to prepare ourselves, really to defend ourselves. At the same time, all what we have should we give to Ukraine, and at the same time really start to make us strong and give Putin the clear red line.
I'd like to make a point here, because what you just said is very interesting. It shows that different people took different lessons from Helsinki. And while in Europe, in Germany in particular, the lesson, as you just said, was the lesson of increased stability and security, and as a consequence of it, decreased spending for defense and security. In the United States, in the 1980s, as the data show, the defense spending increased, and in the end, it was more Reagan and Thatcher who brought the Cold War to the end by outspending.
It was more Gorbachev, I would say, but we can discuss.
Let's say all of them.
Well, we can discuss Gorbachev. Of course, he played an enormous role, but the material situation at the end of the 1980s was that the Soviets could no longer compete. Yeah, they were outspent and outarmed, and it was this rather than the spirit of Helsinki that brought them to their knees.
Maybe one important aspect is, if you look at the Helsinki Final Act, is probably the global consciousness of human rights. I mean, that's something which must be remembered, and human rights activism, both during the Cold War, both in the West and East Europe, and globally, was one important factor. And here probably this leads us to discuss that, as you both have indicated, and if you look at the human rights activism, who is doing the activism today and what kind of organization? You mentioned we have to be active, but in this case, who is we? Do we need a great European leader again, or do we need active civic organizations or international organizations like European Union, NATO, etc.? How do you see? Who is the doer?
I would say at first now the priority is we have to increase our defense effectivity and we have to be to make strong Europe which can really defend itself. This is the challenge, and for that Ukrainian is needed. Even that, and that's very good what European Union is trying now with armament to increase that dimension, to cooperate in this field with Ukraine. Ukrainians are doing well with the drones and they produce themselves, and we are not able to do it in that way. So we can learn even in this field from Ukraine. And that's why security cannot be done on the national way. It has to be in an integrated way, and that means that the European part of NATO, together with Ukrainians, have to organize that integrated way and to defend ourselves against Russia. That's the first point, and the second point is that we have to increase our opportunities, our not only the budget, our ability to reconstruct Ukrainians. And the third point I would really mention, we have not so much time, is in my view the question of civil society.
Exactly.
And I think this is, in my view, a very important thing, that security is not only an issue of states. If we see the Ukrainians, in which way the citizens, organizations, associations, private persons collect money and give drones and whatever to the military. Really the people are defending themselves, not just a president or just an army. And we have learned from that. That's one point. And the second point, the second point is that we learned, I think, that democracy cannot be exported. But if it's not possible to export democracy, we have to learn that in every case we have to support Democrats in authoritarian and dictatorships. And this we have to much more. United States with US aid, yes, and other instruments was doing it in a marvelous way. We in Europe and we in Germany are far away from doing so, and that's why I think we should do much more in supporting Democrats in exile, to give not only the opportunity to survive, but also to give them opportunity to be active in the exile towards its own countries, not only Ukrainians, but also, for instance, the Russian exile, the Belarus exile, and other more. In all these fields, we have to develop much better institutions.
Maybe 2 points, brief points on this. One, there is no underestimating the importance of the Helsinki Final Act for the growth of the dissident movements in Central and Eastern Europe in 1970s and 1980s. The opening statement of the Charter 77 specifically refers to the Helsinki document as an inspiration and as a legal pillar of their argument and their claims for the observation of human rights in the politics of the communist nations. Anna Shabatova, one of the original signatories of Charter 77, is here in this room, and I'm sure she will talk about it tomorrow or the day after. The second thing that we should not be forgetting is that there is an inherent asymmetry between the situation of civil service institutions and organizations in a democratic country and in a country that is not democratic. You know, every Putin official will tell you that the Russians are supporting the special operation in Ukraine and they are defending the human rights and whatever else, but it's not the same thing. Václav Havel wrote an essay in 1980s called The Anatomy of a Reticence about the or disarmament, anti-nuclear movement in Western Europe approaching the dissidents in the communist countries as their natural partners and natural allies in raising their voices against the war. And Havel wrote, yes, we are free to raise our voice against the war and against armaments in your country, but not in our own. Yeah. And that's the situation of the Russians today.
A couple of weeks ago, here in Finlandia Hall, Professor Carl Schlögl pointed out in the Helsinki debate seminar that we need to find a new language to describe the situation in which we find ourselves today, and we need new concepts and notions which can help us to understand exactly what is going on, and the old metrics, it doesn't work anymore. So that's why we are struggling to come to grips with the new reality, represented also by the new totalitarianism. My question to you is, I think we are coming until end of our panel. Who is responsible of creating this new narrative, which Professor Schlögl hoped to see, and also the element of hope, which was mentioned here, and so that the new narrative is not only about military wishes. Of course, we live in the time of crisis and wars, but what could be, using the Spirit of Helsinki as a kind of starting point, what could be this new narrative, and who could be responsible for it? How do you see the role of intellectuals today, for example, and politicians and leaders like Václav Havel? Are we hopefully seeing some new Havel in a soon? Let's put it in this way.
Well, it's a big question, and in my mind, big historical figures are mostly created, or they mostly appear because of a situation. The crisis makes the leaders, and since we are definitely in a crisis, so I hope that we may have some young leaders among us who will make themselves known presently. On the second point, I'm sorry. I know it's contrary to popular thinking, but I don't have much credence in narratives. It's actions that make history. It's people acting rather than talking. So narratives are only ex post facto versions we give to events. It's my view.
Yeah, but actions might create narratives.
I would say it is very similar to what happened 35, 36 years ago. I can remember that the speech of Gorbachev in the UN in December '88, and I think this speech should be read in every school class, because it was really a surprise that the chairman of the Soviet Union, who usually sent tanks if the spirit of freedom came out, and there was clear the commitment to international law, to all these cooperation towards the global challenges. And then he said, there's the opportunity to choose our own system. And then we asked ourselves, being in opposition for years, what should we do now? Wait for a Gorbachev in GDR? No. Take your own responsibility. Mea res agitur. We have to do our things today. My own option was then to take its initiative for foundation a party. That was the Social Democratic Party. But now in Europe, we have to come together and to make strong Europe, to defend itself, to stick to our own values, even inside. Even inside, there are dangers, there are enemies of our democracy inside. In Germany, we have AfD, but we have states in Europe where we have really difficulties, and we have friends of Putin inside Europe, and we have to talk with, and we have even giving sanctions for that. We need a very close, common unity in our fight, stick to our values, and really go forward to defend ourselves and to be in solidarity with Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Meckel and Žantovský, for a nice panel. And you mentioned the need of dialogue. I think that was exactly what the Spirit of Helsinki included in 1975, opening up new possibilities for dialogue, finding out what is happening and how we can influence. My last question is, as we all three here probably have something which could be called as a memory, we remember 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. It might be dangerous, including personal and community memories. But how do you see that the world will look 10 years in, let's say 2035? Are we still wondering what is going to go with the Spirit of Helsinki? Are we still having dialogue? Or probably, as I think Europe is also known for its revolutions, renaissance, and capacity to reform it. So which Europe would you want to see?
Okay. I think it was Sam Goldwyn, the middle name between Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, a filmmaker who was an emigre from Germany to the United States, and his English was not impeccable. And he once said, it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. So I will be very cautious, but and maybe the reason I'm cautious is also because I'm not very optimistic about our imminent future. I think we will have to go through a big crisis in Europe and possibly in the world. And I just hope that we can emerge at the other end of it alive and hopefully intact.
Thank you.
I would say that I'm really not so hopeful in looking this situation. And I think the best 10 years after would be that the UN Charter would remain as a basis of international life. And I'm not so hopeful that it will be successful, but I think we should all what we can to do exactly for that, to establish human rights that remain following it and the rule of law. This is what we have to do without knowing the end. but we have to do it in every case.
Thank you very much. I think optimism and the good spirit is needed, and the hope. Thank you, Mr. Meckel and Mr. Žantovský. Thank you, audience.